Okay. Hello to those who are watching the recording. Does everyone see that we're recording on their screens?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. We are recording. Wait a moment for Eddie and Carol and Charlie to appear, and then we'll commence.
Eddie and Carol here. Our video is not coming up.
Carol's here.
You can't see Carol. I see her clearly
Yeah.
on the screen. Not sure what's going on there. There's Eddie and Carol.
Fred.
And okay. We're all here, so let us commence. We have a new unit. Feels that everyone can see the text on their screens as well.
Yes.
It's the opening page of chapter 9 in Rabbi Barmesh's book, which she calls the modern state of Israel, and she has some texts that have been relevant for a long time, and of course remain so. Just to note that some of the issues of the state of Israel. Let me just actually change my. I want to make a little change here on my. How do I do this? Okay, got the little hand. Okay. The state of Israel's establishment in 1948 brought about the forefront of the question of whether halacha should guide the conduct of a modern state. We understand that Israel is a Jewish state, that the relationship between state and religion is not exactly going to be as it is in the United States. That, for example, Saturday is the Sabbath in Israel, and there are certain rules about it in places, although it does vary somewhat from place to place, and that there are other ways in which the relationship between Jewish law and secular law relate. They're still working it out, shall we say. How do you conduct a war? Now, here's an interesting question. Are there traditional texts that talk about conducting wars which would be applicable to the state of Israel today? Now, you might say, well, there hasn't been a Jewish state since the end of and since ancient times, 2,000 years practically. So why should those rules in any way have any effect? Especially when you think, is modern warfare inherently different from ancient times? Sure, we have wars in the Bible, and we had wars during the Talmud, the times of the Mishnah, early Talmudic times, but they certainly fought those wars in very different ways. And just as the ways in wars are being fought is totally evolving today with drones and AI and other types of weapons, do those texts teach us anything about modern warfare, or are they all irrelevant, right? Should halacha, Jewish law, be used as a source of law for a modern state? And if so, which areas and what types of cases? For example, in Israel at the moment, there's no secular marriage. You can only be married in a religious context, Jew, Muslim, or Christian, and that has meant in Israel, because of the way the coalitions and the government are, that only Orthodox religious law controls and allows for weddings and marriages. So that's also an interesting case of where the law goes. There's an attempt right now to declare that the entire Western Wall area of the Western Wall in Jerusalem is an Orthodox area. Now, today, there is an area that the conservative movement has where we hold services, B'nai Mitzvah services, or just prayer services. They want to wipe that out. But, one side is saying, oh, see, Jewish law should be enforced. But we're saying, yeah, but nowadays it's quite different with different streams in Judaism. So that's these larger questions. So we're going to take a look at one first. The first one we'll look at today about principles with Israeli military. We'll talk about another one that the halachic rules for personal behavior and common sense as the basis for its ruling. Maybe those laws might not apply for the military, even if they applied for the individual, and that there may be a distinction between those. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of rules about the question of this issue, the greater land of Israel. We have seen people say it's halacha, it's Jewish law, that you cannot give up 1 inch of the greater land of Israel, even for the sake of peace, and that every inch of the state of the land, greater land of Israel belongs to Jews. Well, what if you want to write a peace treaty and you have to give up some of it? Can you do so? Or is that against Jewish law? We'll see a number of these questions, Rabbi Theodore Friedman, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and Rabbi Shaul Yisraeli, differing views on the ceding of territories for peace. Sadly and unfortunately, as we know, we still do not have peace in the Middle East. And even this week, who knows, because we don't, where that's going. Okay, so here we go. The modern state of Israel. Here we go. This is written by Rabbi Shlomo Goren, born Shlomo Goranchik in Poland in 1917 and lived till 1994. Chief Rabbi of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, moved to Palestine in 1925. He was a student, studied at Hebrew University. Excuse me. And he was actually in the military, in the Haganah, which was the predecessor of the IDF. Some of you may be familiar with that history. Before the state was founded, there was an organization called the Haganah, which basically became the IDF. He was a chief rabbi of the army, trained as a paratrooper, and he went into the field. He was known for his vows. So in other words, this is not a man who has spent his entire lifetime sitting in a yeshiva and studying. As more well, for better or worse, is more common. He was somebody who was very much on the front lines, was in the army, served in the army, as do modern Orthodox individuals in Israel. All right. Rabbi Goren aimed to create a Jewish military rather than a military of Jews. He developed new principles, established protocols to allow observant service members to maintain their religious observance without withdrawing from field duties during Shabbat, for example. What do you do on Shabbat? Yeah, as you may know, it's written in the book of the Maccabees, well, if the enemies know that you're not going to fight on Saturday, well, what a great opportunity to attack. Well, the Maccabees themselves decided that they could defend themselves on Shabbat, but nowadays, you just can't. You have to recognize that when you're in a war, it's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So he had to deal with that. He became the Ashkenazi chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, chief rabbi of Israel in 1972, and he was definitely a more modern force in many of his rulings. So now we have a book which he's going to write. This book is different from all of the books of Responsa, that the topics do not have an ongoing tradition of rulings from generation to generation. There is nothing parallel in the Shulchan Aruch, right? The Shulchan Aruch is the classic code of Jewish law, 16th century, the books written by those who made decisions from the time of Bar Kokhba. Now, we like to sometimes say that the end of Jewish sovereignty was when the temple was destroyed in the year 70 of the Common Era, but that actually is not true. There was a second revolt against Rome, the Bar Kokhba, and that was put down in the 2nd century. Yes, question, Tammy? No? Okay. Does someone have a question? No. Okay. So really, the end of Jewish military power in the land of Israel was 135 CE, 65 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. So from that time until 1948, when there was a state of Israel, these laws were not being discussed in a practical manner, right? There were no laws of military, war, national security that had a real connection to the lives of the people. Yes, there were theoretical discussions, and we'll take a look at some of them, but they were clearly theoretical discussions that did not affect a Jewish military because there wasn't any. Okay. For nearly 2,000 years, these issues appeared to be as laws for the messianic age. Even Maimonides, Hilchot Melachim, laws of kings and their wars, is not capable of guiding the establishment of military procedure since they are directed at messianic times. Okay, so he's going to try to deal with this. Now, what time is this? Is he dealing with this and what issues? In what unfortunately is a very contemporary issue now is, of course, the Israeli military in Lebanon, which, as we know, is over the next few weeks is being discussed. Interestingly enough, any of you have seen the play Giant on Broadway, it revolves around an article that was written by the Jewish children of the Jewish, no, not Jewish, the children's author Roald Dahl. He wrote an article about the Israeli military in Lebanon during this period, 82, 83. Okay, so we have here, oops, let me just move this one second. Move something. Okay. In 1982, the Israeli military besieged Lebanon's capital city of Beirut. They're not near Beirut today, but they're fighting against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. A military operation called Peace for Galilee, because the PLO has the headquarters there. Then it was about the PLO. Today it's about Hezbollah. I'm sure we're all following what's going on with the peace treaty, but let's just be clear. Israel is fighting Hezbollah. Hezbollah has made life in northern Israel impossible. People who live in northern Israel were not able to go out of their shelters, go to school, go to the grocery, because Hezbollah keeps shooting rockets at northern Israel. And Israel cannot have a situation where a significant part of its country is uninhabitable. That's why Israel is in southern Lebanon, and Hezbollah, of course, is supported and financed by Iran, something that we just should all be aware of, which sometimes you hear on TV, is not always clear. Okay. He discussed the question whether halakha required that a side of the besieged city area must be left unblocked so that those trying to flee the city could escape unimpeded. Let's stop for a second. Imagine you're a military leader and you're besieging a city. Now, the question is being raised. This is the entire question he's going to be talking about throughout this article. Do you surround it on 4 sides, or you do surround it on 3 sides? All right. What's the advantages and disadvantages of each one? Why would you encircle it fully on 4 sides, even if it's a circle? And why might you say go on 3 sides? Any comment, question? Which would seem to be the obvious way to besiege a city?
Apparently, the idea is to allow people to escape from that 4th side.
Right.
It
Right.
being a humanitarian issue.
Okay, so here's a question. Are we dealing with a value of humanitarianism? I.e., if you besiege a city on 3 sides and one side is left open, well, you want to allow those people who are your enemies, perhaps, to leave that side. Okay, suppose you are a military person. How would you argue against leaving one of the sides open?
And you could bring in supplies from that open side.
Yeah, the whole point of a military siege is to maybe starve them, to make them unable to defend themselves. Now they've got an open side.
You have your keys, your wallet.
Tammy, you need to mute. Tammy, you're not muted. Tammy? I don't know if you can hear us. Okay. All right. Tammy, you were not muted, so
I'm sorry.
okay. So the question is, yeah. So if you have one open side, you've got several things that can happen. Yes, you can have supplies brought in, and if the purpose of the siege is to either starve them or make it seem that perhaps you want to not just starve them, but make it seem that resistance is futile because ultimately they're going to not be able to have weapons and food or escape. Therefore, you could argue if you put the siege on all four sides, you are more likely to win the war, which is what war is about. After all, you want to win the war. But now there's a question that is being asked, and this happened and there was a question in Beirut, how far the Israelis should go. Should they go all around after or not? I mean, we know that, for example, Masada, was there an escape route? No, the Roman soldiers were on four sides. When the Temple Mount was besieged in the revolt that ended in 70 of the Common Era, was there a opening for the Jews to leave? Well, one Jew actually, a few did leave, but no, the Temple Mount was fully surrounded by the Roman soldiers. So this concept of leaving one side open, which we're going to see in a moment, does exist in Jewish law. The question is it applicable to modern warfare? Okay, that's the question. Any comments or questions before we take a look? Okay. So how do we know? Rabbi Goren, by the way, is a master of all these sources, as we will see. Rabbi Goren believes that state affairs should be conducted according to halakhic rules specific to states and not rules meant for individuals. This is an important distinction, right? You could say that if two people are fighting, there are certain rules, but if two countries or militaries are fighting, is it the exact same rule, or are there other principles that might apply? Okay. As a result, he cites Maimonides. Now he's going to Maimonides. Maimonides lived, right, at a time where it's 1,000 years or so, over 1,000 years since there was a Jewish military. A work that deals with both practical halakha and halakha meant for a Jewish state under the rule of a Jewish monarch. Okay. Maimonides understands the regulation that in a war of conquest. Now, if we look at the rules about warfare in Jewish sources, we'll find that there are two types of war: milchemet achova, milchemet reshut, an obligatory war and an optional war. We'll get to those in a moment. Okay. In a war of conquest, one side must be left open. This is not a military campaign in which you're attacked and you have to defend yourself, or you're about to be attacked and you have to defend yourself. This is a war where you go out for conquest. One side must be left open. In other words, during a siege, one must surround the besieged territory on 3 rather than 4 sides. Surprising, counterintuitive, could it be effective? Rabbi Goren stresses that the primary purpose of the open siege rule is to teach Jews to be compassionate towards their enemies. He cites 2 possible tactical advantages. Now, we didn't even speak about that. You would think there'd be a tactical disadvantage to leaving that side open. How can there be a tactical advantage? And to what degree? And this is warfare. So to what degree does this question of compassion have a role? Or, there were those who would say, well, all is fair in love and war, right? I think our current Secretary of Defense would agree with that. So the question is, how do you express, or maybe there are certain situations where the compassion does not apply? Okay. He cites two possible tactical advantages, but considers these to be of secondary importance. Okay. In an ancient translation of the Bible, Targum, the Bible was translated several times into Aramaic, which was the vernacular of the Jews of the Greco-Roman world, citing the rule, signifying it is not something Maimonides invented, but possesses the authority typical according to rabbinic sources. Additionally, a later midrash includes a significant quote that supports the open siege rule. In other words, Rabbi Goren is going to take a classic rabbinic viewpoint that his words have to be supported by texts. He can't just make the stuff up. He has to find support in the sources that says this is a Jewish value. So what does he find? A specific law in the laws of siege, from which we learn about the level of humanitarian ethics of the warfare. Okay, Maimonides. When we besiege a city to capture it, we do not surround it on all four sides, but only three sides. We leave a space open for escapees. Okay. Anyone who wishes to escape with their life may do so. As it is written, now Maimonides, not only of Maimonides, but Maimonides is quoting a biblical source. They deployed against Midian just as God commanded Moses. We learn from tradition that God commanded Moses thus to leave one side open. Now, yes, you're going to say it doesn't exactly say that in that biblical source, but there is an understanding from, again, this extra biblical source. This law of Maimonides is based on the approach of Rabbi Nathan and Sifrei Matot, again, rabbinic material around the time of the Talmud. They deployed against Midian. This is an interpretation by ancient rabbis to mean that that Moses allowed the Midianites to flee from the fourth sides. It would seem that the writer of the Sifrei disagreed with Rabbi Natan because he's going, okay. There are other rabbis who disagree. Some say 3 sides, no, 4 sides. Okay. However, again, Rabbi Goren is so familiar with all of these sources, he finds another one, a later midrash, preserves what Rabbi Goren believes is the original meaning, showing that the anonymous main voice of Sifrei, now, again, often in these rabbinic sources, they don't tell you always who said what, they just give you the source. They just give you a quote. Agrees that Moses was commanded to besiege Midian only on 3 sides. Rabbi Natan then came to give a reason for this ruling. Its purpose was to give the besieged army a 4th open side so the enemy could flee and escape with his life. Therefore, it appears that the reason for the law is the humanitarian. The Torah has compassion upon the enemies, allowing them to escape with their lives. Okay. In a war of conquest. Okay, so 1, you give the enemy the possibility of escape. Here's some other, now, you're going to argue that makes no sense, right? From a military point of view. So here, look at these other reasons. Giving an enemy the possibility of escape may weaken the will of the besieged to continue to fight so that they will not fight until the bitter end. People are fleeing this battle. It's a lost cause. Why are we continuing to fight? Or 2, opening a way of escape may result in clearing the population from the city, a goal of a war of conquest. Oh, now they're leaving the city. So now that we're going to conquer this land, there are fewer people to conquer. And it makes it easier for conquer the land because the people have left. So he's giving 2 other reasons. By the way, what do you think of these 2 reasons? 1, let me go review them. 1, allowing an opening will weaken the will of the remaining defenders. And 2, if they run away, that'll make it easier for us because we're trying to conquer this land and make it part of our land. So they'll be left with the population that lives there. They're going to run away. Okay. Those are the additional reasons. What do you think of them?
There are people who are leaving in both Iran and Lebanon, but not to the extent that it's making either country easier to conquer.
Okay. So that second reason he gives, that when people leave, it makes the country easier to conquer. Not necessarily, right? Because often if people leave, it's a civilian population, but the military people are staying, right? So the idea that they are leaving is going to make it easy to conquer may not be true. Although, we think about India and Pakistan, for example, when the British made that partition, people did leave, and it did make it easier. And we can think about 1948. What happened in 48? Many Arabs did leave their homes, and that did create a situation where Israel had larger areas. So, but today, I think Kara points out that may not be as effective an answer. What about the first answer? People leaving hurts the morale of those who are left. So that's a good thing. Any suggestions? Is that a good reason?
Doesn't seem to be working now.
It doesn't seem to be working
No,
out.
right.
I mean, people, could it work? I don't know. Yeah, I think we're saying, that seems a pretty tough one, right?
Well, a lot of people have left. Ukraine isn't under siege, but a lot of people have tried to escape. But the military can't leave, so they have to keep fighting. And there are a lot of people who can't leave for many reasons. So I don't think that's a legitimate reason either. I agree
Yeah,
with.
the question we have here is Rabbi Goren has this reason, the humanitarian, and he finds this humanitarian reason to be valid enough from the sources to be a rule that we should apply today. And he's finding these other two reasons in order to buttress his argument that, okay, maybe you don't like the humanitarian reason, but I'm telling you it's a good idea anyway because it has some benefit.
Rabbi, I have not read that the IDF is in any way preventing people in Ukraine or Iran or Lebanon from leaving. They might not have left. They have left some areas open, apparently, so people can leave, and they are allowing that to happen.
Yeah, in Ukraine, there's also a national spirit, shall we say. Leaving is seen as perhaps traitorous, right? I mean, in other words, if you're under attack from a foreign invader and you leave, that is something that people, one can make the opposite argument that leaving only shows those people didn't care about them, so we're just going to fight harder for the people who are left. You can make that argument. Yeah. Charlie and then Rini.
Yes, in the current warfare, we have the civilian populations and we have the military population in the given area. And Israel is very aware of this, and they want the civilians to move out of an area that they're attacking so they can concentrate on the military people. So leaving an area open is a very good method generally in Gaza and probably also in Beirut.
But
To
but
allow
look
the
at your
population, the civilian population, to move out of the danger area and just concentrate on fighting the military aspect.
okay, but you also have the counter. If let's say you're the enemy, we want our civilians to stay. That way, our enemies shoot at our civilians die, and we can see and show the world how terrible they are, right? So
Yeah, that's an issue. It's
this
a
is a
big issue, and we
perverse
really don't
argument,
know how to handle that.
right?
Exactly.
But see the perversity of this argument. We want our civilians to die because that helps us win the war of propaganda. That's what you see in Gaza, right? Yeah. Okay. Irina, you were going to
Well,
comment.
I actually had a question, and that is it humanitarian? Well, it's sort of what Charlie, on the same idea of what Charlie was saying. Is it really humanitarian to warn the civilians that they're going to attack so they can get out of the way, or or is it not? Do they get hit anyway when they hit another area? Do their own people put them in it's very
Right.
complicated.
It's complicated, but just to talk about the Israelis, they have, for example, they'll say, "Look, you live in an apartment building, and Hezbollah has set up their headquarters in this building, so we're going to bomb it. So we're going to send that. We'll bring flyers out, and we'll put the flyers out in the air, and you can read the flyers and get. We want you to get out of this building because Hezbollah has, I mean, so, yeah, Hamas has taken over this building for a command center, for example. That does happen.
No, I know. I think that's a good thing. But it's hard to wrap my head around. You can leave a space open for people to leave, and they are sending them away from an area they know they will hit. So that's very humanitarian. But there's nothing definitive that you could say, well, yeah, that's a good thing. I'm not expressing myself well at all, but it's similar, I think, to leaving a space open. But these people really didn't have much place to go, but at least they were warned to get out of a possible bombing, which I think is a humanitarian.
Okay, a fair statement. A fair statement. What has become different today, I think, the reasoning you see here, or say the reasoning in ancient times, okay, it's a war of conquest. We want to conquer your land and make it part of our land. So we're going to attack, and we're not going to go on four sides. One side, you can get out, you're gone. Now we've conquered the land. In that situation today, the people who got out would say, okay, we lost the war, but we can come back into to the area that you conquered, right? Or this is a question of refugees, which sometimes cannot be settled with people returning. Okay. All right. Let us go I'm sorry, where were we? Okay. So the question, another question. Again, Rabbi Goren is trying to very specifically apply the rules of Jewish law in this question of Lebanon. And one of the questions that he has to answer is whether this war is and here are the terms, we'll see. Obligatory war, milchemet mitzvah. You see the word milchemet means war of required. Milchemet reshut. Is it an optional war? Two main types of war. Different rules apply. And so Rabbi Goren is going to have to say, well, which type of war is this? Which will tell me which rules will apply in this case, okay? Rabbi Goren argues that Operation Peace for the Galilee, that's the 1982 Israeli IDF operation in southern Lebanon, was an obligatory war, a milchemet mitzvah. So how do we know what a milchemet mitzvah? He says this: the siege of Beirut is not for the purpose of conquering the city, right? The Israelis did not go into Beirut because we want to make Beirut part of Israel. We're going to conquer Israel and move our border, and Beirut is going to be northern Israel. That was not the intent. Rather, to defend from an enemy and to destroy the enemy. In that case, it was PLO. Today, it's Hezbollah. This type of war is an obligatory war. Okay, it's not just for the sake of conquest, but it's for the sake of defense. A Jewish military force undertaking a siege must leave one side open so the people of a besieged city may escape with their lives. And he goes on to explain. Let me just move this. This is because an essential aspect of this law is learned from the war with Midian. A war that was not a war of contest, but a war of retribution against the enemies. Again, he's taking the biblical text when God says to Moses, attack the Midianites and defeat them. Despite this, Moses is commanded not to surround the Midianites on four sides to give an opportunity to, right? According to this law, in any kind of warfare, no matter what it's called, It is forbidden to close off a besieged cities from all sides, since this raw rule is operative even in a war of retribution with Midian. Nonetheless, we have the right to prevent the besieged from receiving reinforcements or the means to break the siege. Oh, here's right. Isn't that the other argument? Well, if you leave one side open, what are you crazy? Because they're going to have other soldiers come in, such as food, water, and armaments through the fourth open side. The obligation to leave a side open in a siege is to allow movement in one direction only, from the city outward, not from the outside to the city. So it seems to imply that you can surround it on three sides, but on that fourth side, you can have a one-way door, right? That things go out, but nothing comes in, because he realizes that in terms of tactics, this doesn't make a lot of sense. The reinforcements are coming in, and the food and everything else is coming in, so that's just not going to work. So it's a one-way door. Then he says, are these rules for war operate in our times? You know, there are these rules of war, an obligatory war, an optional war, leaving your side open. Maimonides is talking about it, but Maimonides is just a theoretical scholar. Is that true? In the past, when a Jewish king with political authority, or does that, you know, is it just theoretical, or is it about biblical times, or does it even apply today? Maybe you could just say, hey, doesn't apply today, right? We got other things going on. We got drones, we got AI, we got all sorts of, we got nuclear weapons. How can you apply any of those rules of war today? So what does he say? Now we must consider whether this law recounted in Maimonides is obligatory for us today, and this, you know, the war in Lebanon. Oops, let me go to the next page. 1 second. Oops, one more. Okay. Not okay. Okay. All right. Nachmanides, he's a different scholar, thought the basis for the open siege, one having one side open, was humanitarian, i.e., we want people to escape. We don't want these non-combatants to be involved in any way with the getting injured. And tactical, which we saw those other tactical reasons people can escape or will reduce the morale. Whereas Maimonides thought that it was tactical. Interesting. So was Maimonides just arguing on a tactical basis? Rabbi Simcha HaKohen argues Maimonides did not include this in his Sefer HaMitzvot. Now that's one of his main works. Enumeration. You know, we say there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah, and there have been many scholars, including Maimonides, who write a work trying to decide exactly what they are, how they apply, what you do to fulfill them. Okay. Even though he included it in his Mishnah Torah. In other words, he seems to have it not in his practical book, but he did have it in a larger philosophical work that was dealing with laws that may not be applicable today. Okay. While Nachmanides included among his practical book. Nachmanides writes in his Sefer HaMitzvot, or writes in his critique of Maimonides, that we are commanded to leave one side open in a siege, so those who wish to flee will have a means of escape. We are, according to Nachmanides, to do this so we will learn to behave with compassion. You know, by the way, that's the classic rule. What's one of the classic reasons why we send away the mother bird? You know, we see a nest of eggs and we want to take the eggs. We want an omelet. So we send the mother bird away because we don't want the mother bird to think that see someone take her eggs, and that's a very cruel thing. So we have to have compassion on the mother bird. Okay. Furthermore, they will be able to flee and not continue to oppose us. This is not a commandment just for war with Midian, but for all generations. According to Nachmanides, the reason for the commandment is humanitarian. You know, there are other rules of wars in the Torah that says he points out when you draw near a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace. This is done in compassion for the lives of the enemy. We are commanded to be compassionate. Okay. However, Maimonides, based upon one interpretation, thinks the reason for the commandment is not humanitarian from tactical. We encircle and do not allow them to flee, and if they will continue to fight. In other words, if they can't flee, they're just going to continue to fight to the end. And that's tactically something we would prefer them to just surrender before they fight to the end. All right. They will protect their lives with all of their power, and they may achieve victory because it is well known from history. Victory came from great desperation. In other words, you circle it on all four sides. The people inside, what option do they have? We're going to die anyway, so let's just fight on and fight on with more force and power because we can't get out. Therefore, the law is not to be counted among the commandments. Rather, the Torah offers advice on how to achieve victory in a siege, and this only applies to optional wars, not obligatory wars. But rather, as Rabbi Goren say, and we're almost done with this. First, while Nachmanides includes both reasons, he thinks it is obvious to include this law among the 613 commandments because of the first reason, compassion. His language in the second reason is obviously an additional matter to support, but the first reason is the essential one, compassion. Second, Maimonides does not limit this law of leaving the fourth side open to optional wars. He believes this law operated the same way in an obligatory war. Now, if you say this is an obligatory war, it's more important to win. Why is it more important to win? Because you're being attacked. You're defending yourself. You're not going out. If you lose an optional war, okay, so I didn't conquer the territory, but the home country is fine. But in an obligatory war, if you lose, your country is destroyed. So is this law just for one or the other, or is it for both? And you see that Maimonides does not limit it. He believes the law operated in the same way, just as we offer an enemy peace in an optional and obligatory war. Okay, so let's see his conclusion. Concludes that the humanitarian rule of offering an enemy the option of peace signals that a similar humanitarian goal serves as a basis for the open siege rule. In other words, he's saying we have one rule which we know for sure directly from the Bible applies to both types of wars, and it does so because of a humanitarian reason. Therefore, that humanitarian reason is going to apply to both types of wars. According to Maimonides, this law operates in our time. If we besiege an enemy, whether an obligatory war or an optional war, whether within the borders of Israel or outside, we are forbidden to encircle a city from all sides. We must allow a side to be open, to allow those who flee to save their lives, as long as they do not take up this advantage of this open side to bring in reinforcements with us. In other words, it's a one-way door. The fourth side, it's a one-way door. May peace come to our soldiers and tranquility arrive. Okay, so he just makes the final quote. What do you think? Think he's right, wrong, softy, not good military tactics? What do you think?
In some ways, the IDF is allowing for humanitarian options. They are telling civilians to leave in an area that they are going to destroy or bomb. So, but I also don't think that the state has made a decision, or the IDF has made a decision to base all of their tactics on halacha. It's this rabbi's opinion.
Well, you're right. In other words, there are a lot of decisions that the IDF has to make, shall we say, one on the fly. You allow, for example, you have a humanitarian desire, right? How much? How wide is the opening? How much do you allow for humanitarian aid? I mean, Israel had to face this issue with Gaza. How much humanitarian aid? What happens when the people running the humanitarian aid are also, in fact, members of the enemy army? It does, in fact, get tricky in real life. But do you think but in general, Carol, do you agree with him, or do you think he's being too too kind for modern warfare.
Do agree with him.
Okay, Charlie, what do you
do
think? Okay, for
In
let Carol finish.
today's world, you cannot have a preordained defense method. You have to keep the enemy guessing. You can't divulge your plan of action to your enemy. And by saying we're always going to leave one area, an exit open, we're tipping our hand to our enemy. You can't do that in modern warfare. Maybe you could do that in ancient warfare, but definitely you can't do that in modern warfare. Every battle is different. Every war is different. I mean, World War II changed the whole idea of what warfare is all about. I mean, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We didn't leave too many exits open there.
Mm-hmm.
And there were civilians and military people in both cities.
Correct.
But that's how we had to end the war to save our lives. Continuing the war with an enemy that wanted to fight to the last man or hand-to-hand battle, and that we couldn't do that. So we had to end it in some way, and we ended it with the bomb. Boom.
Right. I mean, that's a good question, Charlie, you raised. What would Shlomo Goren say about dropping the atomic bombs, right? Because there were people in the United States who were opposed to it, and Truman gave the order to do so. Right. Rini, did you have your hands up?
Save
Yeah.
our lives.
Is Israel the only country that has such a strong, specific guidelines for their army in terms of humanitarian fighting?
Well, there are ethical rules that many armies have. The United States Army has ethical rules of warfare, although we see what is I think what is fascinating here is that there's a larger concept of, even in warfare, there are concerns for you. All is not fair in love and war, is what Rabbi Goren is saying, that there are humanitarian concepts that should apply even in warfare. So that is something that is part of, the Jewish spirit, the Israeli, Israeli spirit.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, that it's more a Jewish thing, because if you think of, well, we just bombed Iran, and Trump was bragging about how much damage he was going to do. And in World War II, nobody seemed to be concerned about bombing cities where people were living. But we have higher standards, but we are always held to higher standards that other countries. I'm not saying we Americans, we as Jews, Israel, always seem to be held to higher standards than other countries. And that's, I think, why there's so much criticism. Everyone forgets that that Israel was attacked first. So, but if another country is attacked, they don't tell that country to, hold back. So I think, this all comes from all these, Talmud and everything and Torah, that we hold ourselves to higher standards.
I have a question about that.
Go ahead.
I have a question about that. Is this law, as it was given in the Bible, is this only meant for the Jewish people, the Jewish state, or is it universally important? Has God said everyone should be observing this, or just the Israelis?
Good question. This particular text that we have here, it's very clear that Rabbi Goren is only speaking to the Israeli army, right? The universal rules that we get from the Torah for all of humanity, one can argue, well, there's the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the 7 laws that were given before God
Of-
spoke to Abraham. There are humane laws that apply to everyone that are in the Bible. And because we talk about Noah, they call them the 7 laws B'nai Noach, meaning the non-Jewish world. So these rules do not, one can argue that in Mitzvot B'nai Noach apply universally. The specifics that Rabbi Goren is talking about only applies to the Israeli army. Although we like to think that in the world that there are armies that do have codes of ethics, and there are armies that do not, right? I mean, there are armies. Hamas had no code of ethics. They went in and on October 7th, they murdered anyone who was within range of their rifles or kidnapped them. Yeah, Charlie?
There is a Torah law that, if your enemy has lost their load on the donkey and your friend is on the other side of the road, he lost his load on the donkey, that you help your enemy first. That is a Torah law. You go to your enemy's aid to help them get their load straightened.
Right. One can argue that those types of laws are perhaps reflected in the fact that anytime there was a chance for compromise or even a two-state solution for the Middle East, the Israelis have supported that.
They have,
1948,
but it hasn't worked to their favor.
right?
The
1948,
idea
when
is
the UN said 2 states, the
you
Israelis
make a
said yes.
friend out of an enemy. I mean, that's the hope
Yeah.
that your enemy will become your friend because you helped them.
Right, that is a
Unfortunately,
hope.
that's not the way it's working in the world.
Yeah, one could argue that I think Charlie, as you had, that there are a series of values that come from our tradition, from the Bible, from the rabbis, which are not universally held. I think that would be a correct assumption. Any other comments about this? Okay, we have a few minutes, so let me just mention that we're going to deal with a question starting next time, probably take us, next lesson. Now, here's an interesting question. This is from Rabbi Chaim David Halevi. Is a question of the law of one who comes forth to kill you, kill him first. There's a simple rule that if someone's about to kill you, yeah, you are justified in using force and even force to kill that person because they want to kill you. That is a clear individual law. A question has arisen in Israel, and we'll take a look at this next time. How far does that law go in state affairs, right? There are norms about individual self-defense, right? Now, the question that we'll see next week, the government, rather than individual members of society, must be responsible for deciding whether these norms should be employed. Preemptive strike. Is a preemptive strike justified, right? Not only is it preemptive strike, and what do we mean by a preemptive strike? At any time? The United States was in a war, that was a preemptive strike. The question is, can you have so no one would argue that in 67 and 73, a preemptive strike was justified. What happened, of course, is in 67, Israel did take a preemptive strike. In 73, Israel did not and suffered because of that. So the question of how does this rule of preemptive of striking, an individual decides on the spot whether using deadly force is justified, right? Someone attacks you, they've got a gun, they've got a knife, or they've got the ability to kill you. That's an individual decision based upon the individual's assumption about the intent of the attacker. But how does that apply? A government must go through its procedures of consultation and approval, which precludes an on-the-spot decision. So is this rule about attacking a person who wants to kill you making an immediate split-second decision that an individual has the right to do? Does that apply to a government? Again, notice what we're doing here. We're taking a very classic Jewish rule, and we'll see it's based upon something from the Bible, and it's also, well, for better or worse, it's an example from the Bible that can be interpreted in more than one way. That often happens. And questioning, is the rule for an individual the same as a rule for a country? And that's what we'll be talking about, how to retreat members of a hostile population, right? And this is a question about the Arab population of Israel. As you may or may not know, there are over 1 million Arabs who are citizens of the state of Israel. In other writings, they call for equal citizen for people of all faiths. Oh, remember we just had that unit about how does Judaism look about non-Jews, right? So the Declaration of Establishment of the State of Israel, the principle of Darchei Shalom, ways of peace, peaceful relations, should serve as the guiding principle for relations between Jewish and Arab citizens of Israel. The principle of equal citizenship denotes all Israeli citizens, regardless of their religion. So this question of how you deal with both individuals and on a state level is what we'll do next time. Okay, comments or questions are just about done for today. We'll pick that up next time. Anyone? No? Okay. Well, enjoy the good weather.
Yeah.
And
thank you. You too.
Thank you.
we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.